Welcome to the Hank Cisco Show. It's John Doyle here, guest hosting for Hank again this week. Hank's still a little bit under the weather. We're doing our best to sort of keep our prayers and our thoughts with him and his family. But we're really glad you could join us. We have another great topic here today. And again, so we salute Hank, and we hope that he's watching along with us. Today we have Fredericka Waugh, who's from the Alzheimer's Association of Delaware, the Delaware Valley chapter. She is the Associate Director of Diversity and Inclusion with that organization, and we're going to find some stuff out today that's probably really important. And we know that this is an issue that's important to Hank, probably because we have been hearing this on his program for years, but his wife passed away from Alzheimer's, and so we're trying to honor both her memory and keep Hank's subjects alive. So we're going to turn to Fredericka and ask her some questions. I hope you enjoy. Fredericka, can you tell me a little bit about sort of who you are and your connection to your organization?
Sure. I've been with the Alzheimer's Association. This is my 14th year, and I've moved through, I guess you could say, the ranks or so forth. But I came about it because it was a position available, and I didn't realize the connection that I did have at the time. But I since learned that my grandfather had Alzheimer's, and I didn't know that at the time. So it was friends and their families that had been asking questions. And so when the position was available, I thought, maybe I should look into this. And so a friend of mine said, okay, let's take a look at this. She knew about the position. I interviewed for it almost 14 years ago, and here we are.
That's great. Tell me a little bit about the organization itself and its goals and mission.
Okay. The Alzheimer's Association's part of the goals and missions is to make sure that people have the information, make the public aware of this disease, because the more information people have, then they understand it better, and they begin to look at themselves and their family, and when they meet someone who has Alzheimer's, they understand what's going on. So we're very much into caregivers. We want to make sure that our caregivers are educated and know about it. And we also do a lot of advocacy. So we're out there with our congresspeople and our local representatives, getting them to understand the disease, and then they will help us to raise money and to be funded. So we're looking at that aspect of it. And we are very interested in education. We're interested, of course, in research, although the chapter itself doesn't do research, but the organization is responsible for a lot of the research that goes on, and most of our fundraising money goes toward research.
Okay. Can you one of the things I think people get confused about is about what this disease is, and they use Alzheimer's as a catch-all for all sorts of issues that people might have with cognitive problems when they get older. What's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Okay, that's a good question. Dementia is like an umbrella term. There are many, many, many dementias. So, for instance, if someone gets diagnosed and the doctor says, we've diagnosed him or her with dementia, the next question should be, what's causing the dementia? And that's where the Alzheimer's come in, because it could be vascular dementia, it could be dementia with Lewy bodies and so forth. But Alzheimer's is a dementia. It's what's causing this reaction in this person's body, in their brain, because it is a brain disease. So when we look at it, we're looking at, okay, the person's being diagnosed. When they're diagnosed, they probably have had Alzheimer's in their brain for maybe 10 years, but they haven't had any real symptoms that show up, or that they know about. So that's when the doctor needs to find out, okay, when did you notice this, when did you notice that, and find out so that they have some reference of what stage that person may be in at this time.
So the disease itself, it doesn't present immediately, that there's a long time of its buildup until we see something, and dementia is something that may be one of the outward signs. Is that what I would understand?
Well, dementia, yes. Yes, it would be an outward sign, and most of the time, as you probably know, with Alzheimer's, it's going to be the memory loss. That's kind of like the thing that most people understand and know about.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that are also going on at the same time, because it doesn't just start in one part of the brain, with the exceptions of the one temporal dementia. That one starts in the temporal area of the brain. But for most cases, it's just all over. It doesn't have any one particular place that it's going to go. So it's in all the lobes, and the idea is that it's an amyloid protein plaque that collects in the brain, destroys the neurons.
Okay.
And so as it's destroying the neurons in our brain, whatever lobe it's destroying them in, that's where we get the behavior. And that's where we get memory loss, or we get visual changes that can't be corrected by, any way at all.
And so where the plaques are attacking, for all
Right.
practical purposes, or lodging themselves, the damage they do to the neurons in those areas prevents that part of the brain from functioning properly.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So for instance, a person might not, maybe experience memory loss because that's where the plaques is, but in addition, there could be some other physical attributes that take place. And you talked about memory, or about vision, but there may be others. Okay.
Yes.
That's really fascinating. So then, when we think about Alzheimer's, we're often like stuck in this memory loss, and that may be a sign for us, but it's not the only sign.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, the person could lose, like I said, they lose their ability to have spatial and visual contact. So they see things different, and that's a problem. They may have a loss of being able to distinguish, where they are, the time and place type of issues. They may not be able to get up in the morning and function. They may not be able to make the coffee and get dressed, because that ability to do that is cognitively changed for them.
So for instance, my mother is in memory care. She has some measure of dementia, something she's struggling with. And so understanding the difference between down the hall and downstairs. And I often say, and talk with my wife and say, it feels like she doesn't, that space and time has changed for her. And so her understanding of those things is just different. And I can't have an expectation of her understanding time in the same way that I understand it.
Right.
And it's hard for us to imagine that people can envision the universe differently.
Yes.
But our brains are our guide to that. So that's fascinating. You mentioned that there's sort of things to look for. What are warning signs of Alzheimer's?
Well, we look at 10 warning signs, so we'll just go through a few of them. And memory loss, of course, is one of the main ones. But we're talking about memory loss that disrupts one's life. Okay, because we all have memory loss every now and then. But this is when the person cannot function because they can't remember certain things. So that's one of them. And they have challenges in planning and solving problems. So that's, we get up in the morning and we don't realize we're planning, but we are. We're thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? Where is it Tuesday? Okay, I need to be at this point and that point. So we start planning. But a person who has Alzheimer's is unable to wake up and do those kinds of things.
Okay.
So that's another one. They have trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. And so we sort of talked about that. But for instance, if there's a floor that has those black and white tiles, or the brown or beige tiles, those dark tiles look like holes to a person with Alzheimer's.
Really?
Now, not every single person experiences that, but many people experience that. So when that happens, then it's dangerous for them, because not only are they trying to step over them, but they are a possibility of having a fall because of that.
Okay.
So that type of thing happens. People misplace things, and we all do that too. But when you misplace things, you have a way of going back and figuring out where it is. But a person with Alzheimer's can't do that. They're unable to retrace their steps. They just can't do that because that brain function is not there anymore. And one of the other things is there may be a change in mood and a change in personality.
Really?
Yes. And that's because, again, the brain is operating, and the person is feeling certain things happening. They're confused all the time, and it's frustrating for them. So their mood will change. Their way of perceiving what's going on around them, they can become paranoid. They may have hallucinations. So there are a lot of things going on that produce a particular type of behavior, which is usually negative. And so unfortunately, that negative behavior, then that makes it very difficult for a caregiver. So there are a lot of warning signs, so to speak.
That's really interesting. And, almost everything you said are things that I have noticed in my personal life. I know Hank, when we talked about his wife, we talked about that too. I've said often it's almost like filters are missing from my mom. Like she's lost some things that helped her control what might be. Like there's days I'm really mad at someone. My students here know when I'm mad.
Okay.
But there's days I'm mad, but I'm not mean, right? But I know there's a mean in me, and I control that. And if that filter's gone, and sometimes, that will happen. I also find that, there's that weird sense of not knowing it's wrong. One of the things my mother struggles with is space and time, right? So sometimes she's really angry about the fact that she doesn't understand a thing clearly. Okay. And as a result, that anger can be misread by me. And I'm like, why are you angry, Mom? And she's like, well, this isn't the way the world is. And I realized that that's a challenge for her to sort of get past, right? Yes. For us, what we sometimes try to do is cover for people in those situations. And so having these warning signs lets someone, it seems to me, be more aware that maybe they should take some action, see a neurologist, talk to someone. Yes. So what do you suggest if someone starts to encounter these signs in a serious way?
Well, you're absolutely right. They need to see a doctor. And the first doctor they're probably going to see is their primary care physician. Great. Okay. So we would hope that that primary care physician, if he or she is unable to actually do a diagnosis, that then they would refer them to a neurologist or a neuropsychologist or a geriatrician, someone who would be able to go further. Because a diagnosis is going to take a couple of hours or more to actually do. Because as you know, with physicians, it's a matter of elimination. Well, you don't have a fever and you have a cough, so maybe you have this. And it's the same thing when they're diagnosing Alzheimer's. They're going to do a lot of different tests. Some of those tests are even mental types of tests. And some of them are drawing blood and everything that they're trying to eliminate and come up with what's left. So then what does this look like? And so once that is done, then the person needs to begin to look at, okay, if this is the diagnosis, then where do I need to go? Who do I need to see? How can I be helped? We work a lot with physicians trying to let them know that we are their resource and that they can talk to the person, but we know that they don't have the time to actually counsel a family or a person with the disease, so they can feel free to send them to us. Now, they don't send them to us in a physical way, but the person just needs to call our office, call our helpline. And our helpline number is 1-800-272-3900. And that number works everywhere in the United States.
And we'll put that somewhere here under the screen so people have it.
Okay. So they'll call our helpline, and they will then be able to talk to someone who can then direct them. They will always be able to talk to someone if they call our helpline. And so that's what we say, that's the first step. The other thing is we have care consultation. So someone could actually have a one-on-one conversation. They could meet with our care consult and talk about what's going on and what are the next steps, where that person will also help them set up a plan. So you're going to do this now, and then, we're going to do that, and you might want to start preparing for in-home health care and things like that. So the plan can be done based on that family. So those are the kinds of first steps that we suggest that people do, is to find out more. They need to find out what is this disease. Okay. So the more education they have, the better off they are. If they're the caregiver, we have caregiver support groups. We have approximately 170 within our territory. Okay. And we're training people. We'll be doing another training for caregiver support facilitators soon. So we have those groups, and they are wonderful because you're in a group talking with people who may be in the exact same place you are now, or they have been in that place. And so you're talking back and forth, just like you and I are talking about what's going on with them. They do invite a doctor or sometimes a lawyer into those groups, but most of the time it's really for the caregivers to sit and talk and help each other and support each other.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great. Before we get to talking at caregivers in any extensive, because I know we want to talk about that, your title is the Associate Director of Diversity Inclusion. Can you talk to me a little bit about why that title exists or what the goals of your specific role are?
Sure. The title exists because the national organization has they've looked at it through the research, and they've looked at the fact that there are people that need more attention and more awareness. And so in our case, it's looking at the African American community, the Hispanic Latino community, our faith-based communities, and the LGBT community. And the reason is because in those communities there are disparities going on. And so we want to fill that as far as Alzheimer's disease is concerned. For instance, in the African American community, we are 2 times more likely to have Alzheimer's. In the Hispanic Latino community, they are 1.5 more times likely to have Alzheimer's. When you look at faith-based, we look at faith-based because a lot of people have faith in whatever religion they are into. And so we want that faith-based community to know about this disease.
Okay.
We want the faith-based leaders to be able to help their congregation. And that could simply be just giving out our helpline number. But we do want them to be aware that we exist. We have committees, and we try to make sure that people from the faith-based community and from all of the communities are involved so they can tell us what is going on. And as far as the LGBT community, we know that they have a lot of disparities, and we know that they have difficulty getting into certain communities, getting home health care, finding places to live. And so we want to be sure that we understand what they're going through and that we are there for them to help them find suitable resources and suitable information. We have one right now support group that is LGBT. So we have talked with a couple of organizations that are LGBT, and we will be having more support groups for them. Because the idea, of course, is we want them to feel comfortable. So we want from their community, we want the facilitators to be from their communities.
That's great. So you're saying this job is sort of split in 2 in a way. One is about helping people who might need help in identifying, and the other is a very communication support oriented.
Yes.
And that's great. It's really that's fascinating. I would never have thought that because you were Black or you were Hispanic that you might in fact have a higher probability of Alzheimer's. I mean, it wouldn't even have struck me.
Right.
And so it's really interesting. And that's part of why I'm hoping people watching get the idea of sort of getting that out to those communities.
Yes.
Our faith-based communities in Norristown are strong, and I'm confident that their voices hearing that might well be interested in getting the word out so their congregations can be helped. That's really, really great. Do we know any reason why those particular communities have a larger chance of Alzheimer's?
Well, the research is saying that because they have high incidences of high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, obesity, that may be one of the reasons why they are so more at risk than other people. So it could be lifestyle, of course, including foods and things like that, and what is available in those communities for people. But people need to really look at that because, yes, you can take the pills for diabetes, but then if you're insistent that you're not going to change your lifestyle, then your body is you're fighting yourself. So that's one thing that they are looking at, and along with that comes the fact that with women, women have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's than men, and so the research is saying that maybe it's the hormonal system, because if you look at when women are likely to go into menopause, it's when they're older, and not old, but they're only in their 50s. But that would then start off by pushing it into age, and age is definitely a factor when it comes to Alzheimer's. There are younger people who have Alzheimer's, we know that, but age is a factor.
Okay. Yeah, that's really fascinating information. Your organization then is gathering all of this data and is able to share that with people who just have those questions.
Yes.
Just really, that's great. And if they call that helpline, they're actually calling you for information about Alzheimer's. Is there a way that they can access some of this data you've been sharing?
Oh, sure. They can ask for it. We'll mail it to them.
Okay.
And, they can just talk it through. We also have consumer education programs, which are like workshops, little seminars they're invited to that. We can send them the list or just talk to them over the phone about
Great.
where, what time, and what the topic is.
Okay. And so let's move on to caregivers then, because that's
Okay.
in some ways the big challenge, I guess.
Yes, it is.
So can you talk to me about what those challenges are for caregivers?
Well, it is the most difficult caregiving situation ever because you see this person who with Alzheimer's, they look fine, but they are not fine, and you know that. You have difficulty because, for instance, if the person has high blood pressure and they have a headache, well, as this disease progresses, they're unable to say to you, I have a headache, could I have a Tylenol? That's just not coming to them. Their cognition is way off balance. So all they're going to do is really act out. And they act out of the fact that I've got this terrible headache, but they can't identify it.
Mm-hmm.
So they start to be very negative. You may reach out and say, well, would you like something? And they'll pull away or they'll push at you. And that's really because they're unable to communicate to you what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And so that makes the caregiving job really, really difficult. And, I was talking to a group the other day and I said, patience, patience, patience. And as people, we don't have the patience because we're looking at someone who seems to be fine. So why are you asking me all these questions and why are you saying the same thing over and over and over again? Why can't you remember? I just answered that question for you 5 minutes ago. And so it's really, really difficult. And then the more the caregiver learns about the disease, they realize that this is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. So they know that the person is going to die from this disease.
So you're talking very much about the caregiver's emotional stress that comes
Yes.
with the issue.
Yes.
And that's not counting the difficulties that physically happen when someone needs to potentially deal with all sorts of new movements around the house, things about
Yes.
eating practices,
Right.
or bathroom practices, those kind of things that might be emotional challenges in and to themselves from anyone who is incapacitated in some way. There's a different emotional issue because the person is changing.
Yes.
And that's really difficult for us to watch. I hear people talk about the decline of a parent or something like that, and you hear that loss of who they are before you lose them physically.
Yes.
And that stress is particularly difficult.
Definitely. Definitely.
My mom's identity is still really strong. So when I visit her,
Great.
it's still rich and interesting. Good. Certainly, she's a different person than she was, but it's rich and interesting. But I can imagine as those moments would get more difficult, especially if someone's doing care in their home.
Yes.
And so, do you do any distinction between people who are like providing primary personal health care, like they're in the home with them, and someone who is perhaps like in the situation my mom is living somewhere else, and I visit her on a very regular basis. But is there a difference in the experience for those people?
There is probably a difference in the experience, but they are both having a difficult time, both of those experiences, because even though, as you know, with a person being in a facility, it doesn't diminish anything. I mean, you still visit, you still call, you still have a certain amount of, a lot of time and thought. And in some cases, it's a financial burden. Families, whether they're in the home or in a facility, the financial burden can become just awful because you start out in one space, you've planned for your retirement, you've planned for your children to go to college, and now you have to take care of someone. And people frequently will quit their jobs to stay home and take care of someone. So that financial difficulty is just extraordinary. And if you have someone in a facility, depending on their ability to pay, it could fall on the family's ability to pay. So you've got the emotional and then you've got the very real financial burden that's going on.
And that's fascinating to me because, when I think one of the difficulties people have is making the decision when to get additional support.
Right.
When I'm thinking about, my father with my mother, my father passed away about 5 years ago. I know he was supporting her even early when probably we were seeing warning signs that we didn't know about because he was making sure she was okay.
Right.
But at what point should someone look to external support? So if I'm living with that parent or living with a spouse, how do I know I need to get in-home care or move someone to a facility?
That is always an individual situation.
Okay.
Okay. And what we say to people, which, then we have to give them an explanation for why we're saying it, is that you will know.
Okay.
When you can no longer be the caregiver that you want to be. Now, there are people who will continue regardless. And the anecdotal research on that is that 40% of the caregivers die before the person they're caregiving for. So we can't prove that, but that is what it seems to be. So it depends. I say to people, when you are so stressed out, when you are unable to do anything at all for yourself, you're not taking care of yourself. Now you're getting sick because you're not keeping your doctor's appointments. You don't have any downtime. Because unfortunately, no matter how large the family is, in many families, it ends up being one person taking care of the person. And so it's very, very difficult. And people making that decision, now they're going through the agony of making the decision. And first, they should probably consider having someone come in and help out. And then, when that is no longer acceptable or working the way they would like it to, then they should consider going into some type of facility. But again, it really depends on the financial ability of the family.
Okay.
Because, you could spend $5, $6, $7, $8,000 a month.
Right.
And there are not a lot of families that can afford to do that. So it's a big decision as to, do I quit my job and stay home, or can we manage to take mom or dad to a facility, that type of thing.
Okay. And so
Excuse me.
we talked a little bit about programs and services, but can you talk a little bit more about the programs and services that the Delaware Valley chapter offers?
Sure. Well, first of all, we do offer the helpline, and we've talked about that.
And what's that number again?
1-800-272-3900. And it's available 24/7.
Right.
And we do the consumer ed, which are like the workshops and seminars. We do a lot of advocacy with the public. In other words, we talk with people, they become ambassadors. They talk very frequently, or as frequently as possible, to their representative or a representative that they've been assigned to. We go to Harrisburg and all of the capitals of the 3 states that we're in, and we talk there. We have programs there once a year. We go to Washington to talk to our Congress people once a year. And we take people with us. We ask them to come. Now we want people to spend the 3 days in Washington because it's a series of programs that we do there. But what that does is, first of all, we need to have our Congress people informed so that when there's a vote or a bill coming up, they know what it's all about. So that's one of the things that we do. We are now in a process of working with volunteers. One of our initiatives is to have a very strong volunteer corps, because we can no longer do all of it by ourselves. And we need people out there who can come and do this type of work, talking with you. We need people to be facilitators for our support groups. We need people who can do our consumer education programs. And we will train them. We have job descriptions for them. And so it's a matter of them getting in touch with us and saying, yes, I'd like to volunteer. What do I need to do first? And we will set that up. And that is a national initiative. It's not just a chapter initiative. So we're doing things like that. We have care consultation where people can sit down and discuss their individual situation and planning on, okay, what do I do next? How are we going to deal with this? And we have a care consult that will do that with them. So we try to cover as many things as we can as far as the beginning of the planning and helping somebody to work through those issues.
There's so many fascinating things you just said, and we're short on time, so I'm not going to get to touch on all of them. But I do have a couple other things I do want to ask about, and one is sort of Alzheimer's treatment. So I know there's no cure, like we don't have a cure, and I know that there are people actively searching for some kind of magic bullet to solve this problem.
Yes.
But from a treatment perspective, what do you folks know?
Well, from a treatment perspective, the research isn't giving us very much.
Okay.
So the thing is that we try to get people to understand the disease and understand what the person will need. Um, there's no pill, there's no anything. We know that people need to have a really good diet. They definitely need to eat well, and that means heavy on the fruits and vegetables. Maybe light on the meat. Maybe fish, chicken. More like what we were talking about is like the Mediterranean diet. So they need to do that. They need to have their health, all of the health issues checked on a regular basis. Um, they need to be social. Now, this doesn't mean that they have to go out every day, but they need to have connection to the world. Their friends still need to talk to them and call them and go out and things like that. They don't need to be isolated. And unfortunately, so many of our older adults are isolated. They don't have people to talk to. Even, I'm talking about just people average person, the average older adult. So those are the kinds of things that we look at as treatment. Getting exercise. Again, it could be just a walk, when weather is really cold, walk through the mall, but be with someone, of course. But they need to do those kinds of things because the person needs to be as healthy as possible. They have Alzheimer's, but they also need to take care of the rest of their body.
That's really interesting as well. It's when I think about those ideas, people may think that the sedentary, safe lifestyle is better for someone who's not full of their mental capacities, experiencing some cognitive difficulty. But you're suggesting instead that people should be active within the limits of their mentality.
Yes.
And the diet's fascinating too. We constantly tell students here it's probably a good idea to skip McDonald's and go find some fruit and vegetables. And it's probably a good idea for the young people to do that, but it's definitively a good idea for someone who's suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yes. We would like them to start very young and everybody to change and take a look at their lifestyle because it seems to be creating a lot of difficulties that we're not aware of. But everyone should be taking a look at that. I agree with you on that.
And so when I'm thinking about looking at a facility, perhaps I want to look at the food that they're serving as well as what kind of care they might be producing. And someone might not even think about that. Place says we're going to serve them filet mignon every night, and that may not be the best option for the person.
Exactly.
So that's really useful. So before we wrap up, let's just talk very briefly about the political stuff that you mentioned. So when you go to Harrisburg, or if you go to D.C., you're trying to advocate for your organization to some extent, so we have funding to do the good works that you're doing.
Right.
And you're also trying to teach them about Alzheimer's. What are you hoping that they are learning? Like, what's the most important lesson?
Well, not only lesson, but the most important people to go to the Congress people is the public, the caregivers. The Congress knows what we want at the Alzheimer's Association. We need money for research. But what we do is we invite and we make sure that the general public, the caregivers are there because they have the stories. And the Congress people need to hear those stories and so that they understand what is really going on in the world of dementia. So that's the important part about going there, is to have them understand what do we need to do, that we need to improve Medicare, that we need to make sure Medicaid stays in place, because a lot of people, that's what they're going to have to use in order to have this person taken care of. So we want them to understand that. We want them to understand that caregivers, maybe we need to look at, how can we help a caregiver? What else do we need to do for them? And how will this respite work? In other words, the person is in need of help, but they can't get out of the house because there's no one there to look after the person with the disease. So we want those kinds of things to be known by our state representatives and our Congress people.
You've said so many ways people can be helped through your organization. How can the community, our viewers out there today, help you and your organization?
Well, they can volunteer with us, of course, and they can contribute money, of course. We have a lot of information. They can help us get that information out, make people aware of this disease, because that's the only way. It's understanding it. and being aware that it exists. And then you will even maybe change your lifestyle and decide, okay, I need to do some different things. I need more exercise. I need to eat different or whatever. But people can help us by just saying, what can I do? What can I do? And we will gladly, help them do that.
And if people wanted to get in touch with you again, what's the contact information they can get?
Well, they can go on our website, which is alz.org/Delval, Delval.
And we'll run that at the bottom of the screen as well.
Great. Or they can simply call the 800 number.
Okay, great. And we'll have all that stuff so people can see it right below us right now.
Okay.
It'll sort of flip by while we finish up. So
Great.
I really want to thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Really a fascinating conversation. I have to honor Hank Cisco, though. And I have to ask you the hardest question probably of the day. Hank always asks his guests what their favorite food is. So what is your favorite food?
My favorite food is probably a vegetable stir fry.
Nice.
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorites.
And that both honors the diet you're suggesting and helps answer Hank questions. That's great.
Okay.
So listen, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
And we thank you guys for watching. John Doyle again, filling in for Hank Cisco on the Hank Cisco Show. We again hope he's doing well. We heard today about Alzheimer's and particularly about the Alzheimer's Association Delaware Valley chapter. We hope that you learned something. We hope that you could take the time to contact the organization and maybe volunteer, maybe help out, maybe offer some money to keep this kind of good work happening. So until we meet again, we thank you so much for viewing, and we'll see you